Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Skuid App-etizers. This is the webinar series that we started where we're showing off some of the cool things that are being built in Skuid, some patterns that you can follow and learn from, and also just some examples of what's possible. So today our guest is Rob Hatch. Rob Hatch is one of our product managers, super experienced Skuid builder. He's going to be showing off an app that he built using some work.com data on the back end, and to show off kind of an expansion, a little bit of a deep dive. If those of you who saw our last Skuid App-etizers, where we talked about dynamic forms and new functionality that's rolling out in Salesforce. So this is kind of an expansion of that, a little bit of a deeper dive, kind of looking into one of the ways that Skuid expands that functionality and can do, can kind of take it a little bit further. So as far as questions, feel free to ask questions as we go through. We'll see them pop up in the Q&A, and then if they're germane to what Rob's working on, I might interrupt and go ahead and ask them in line. Otherwise, I might try to just answer them in the text as we go through. But with that, Rob, I'll go ahead and hand it off to you, and we can get rolling.
Okay, thanks, John. Let's see, I'm going to share my screen here, make sure everybody can see what we're doing. So I'm assuming that most of you know what Skuid is. You have some familiarity with Skuid. If you don't, just at a high level, Skuid is a LoCode toolkit for building really super tailored applications, super interesting applications without writing code that sits on top of the Salesforce platform. So we use a Salesforce data model, use a Salesforce hosting environment, but then write these really amazing applications, or I should say build these applications, because we're not writing code to get this done. And so if you want a little bit better introduction to the kinds of things Skuid does, we have an app gallery on our website that you can go to, and you can see some pretty amazing applications that we've built. We also have a GitHub repo of what we call sample pages that show off some of these ideas. So specific use cases, and you can actually grab these Skuid pages, put them in your org, and mess around with them, learn these kind of applications. In fact, the example that I'm going to show today will be on this GitHub repo for you to install and mess with. We haven't quite merged the code yet, but it will be there later today. And so for those who are involved in recording, those get the show notes afterwards. You can go and play with this as well. So what are we doing today? We're building some sort of a reporting app, form data collection, and really showing off some of the Skuid capabilities. So let's talk first about what needs to be built. Let's imagine a scenario, and then let's look at the solution that we came up with. So the topic of the day, how to get people back to work as the economy reopens after the COVID shutdown, how to manage the risk that the fact that pandemic is still in our midst. This is all super germane to the current situation, and I think every company in the world is wrestling with how they get information from their employees, give good instruction to their employees about what they should do on a day-to-day basis as they come to work, keeping the employee safe, keeping the work environment safe, managing risk as a corporation, all those things together. Really have pointed to the internet as a great tool for that. So could we use the internet? Could we use applications that we have to give the employee a quick and effective way of giving us information about their status? So maybe in 30 seconds or less, could the employee notify us what's up with their condition, and then we could give guidance back to the employee about what we'd like them to do. The company that we're working with would love for this to be a branded experience, not just some sort of out-of-the-box, very generic experience. So branding is important. And the company that we're working with also has a PTO environment. They have a custom object in their Salesforce org that captures PTO requests and tracks PTO. So we have this existing infrastructure. And whenever whenever someone indicates that for reasons associated with COVID, they need to take a day off, we'd like it to automatically feed that PTO request. So that adds a little bit of complexity to the scenario. So, Salesforce has done some amazing things in the last really 6 weeks to roll out a completely reimagined work.com environment. The command center application that they've produced is really amazing. Just a second. Zoom, the webinar, is in the way of my screen. I have to get that out of the way. So the command center application is, again, I said it's an amazing application. Salesforce has invested a lot in it. The data model that they've created is very robust. And the company that we're working with already uses Salesforce. So it seems really, really straightforward to layer on the work.com solution, layer on and integrate that into the experience that our employees already have of using Salesforce. Maybe these employees already have the Salesforce mobile app, and so a solution that could be integrated with the Salesforce mobile app would be very effective. Just another function in that app, that would be wonderful. So the things we really like about the work.com solution, they're already very well documented, proposed extensions. The developer guide is really effective. They lay out the data model really nicely. There's things about the data model that are really elegant. This notion of the fact that they already have a relationship between the employee and a crisis assessment record. That's exactly what we want. We want employees to give us that crisis assessment record every day they're going to come to work, so that we have a record of it on a daily basis. What was their assessment? And we also like the idea that it comes with this authorization consent notion. We'd like a record of the fact that the employee has said, yes, it's okay for you to gather this information for me today. So that's really elegant. But how do we integrate the PTO thing? So we were left with that as the big question. How do we brand it? The Salesforce solution uses a survey as a way of submitting that. That's a good solution, and it maps data back to the employee record. But extending that survey to also include the PTO, that would probably require some code to get done. And then branding that survey. Could I brand that so it looked like really something that was my own company's? Salesforce has answers to that, but generally they include code. And of course, that's something that makes the configuration slower, makes it more difficult for us to roll this out. And we want speed. COVID kind of demands it. Like, we really need this today. And so, oh my gosh, how are we going to get something like that done? It's a big challenge. So let me just show you a solution that we built with Skuid to take care of this. And then I'm going to go behind the scenes and show you how we built it, some of the features of Skuid that enable us to make a dynamic form, enable us to make a multi-object interaction. So let me show you this form. John, can you confirm that you're seeing my Skuid page?
Yep, we're good to go. We are seeing it.
All right, glad to hear that. Okay, so this is an image of this is the form that the user would have. This happens to be a page that's pretty responsive. So as you narrow the screen, maybe even go to a mobile screen, it responds down very effectively, loses some of the padding around elements. We could even do things like this, kind of elegant hint of a quote. We could make that completely go away in the mobile experience. And then this screen really guides the user quickly through the questions that we need and uses controls that are very easy to interact with. So this is what we call a button set, and it's just a way of really quickly interacting with a pick list. Do I yes or no? I can quickly use this control, and you can imagine this on a mobile device. It's big target, easy to push with your finger. The other thing you'll see is you'll note that as I answered the first question, the second question was exposed. So this is a kind of guided experience that Skuid facilitates. So do I consent to this information being gathered? Yes. Did I have symptoms? Yeah, maybe for today I'm going to say, yeah, I've got some symptoms, and that yeah, maybe I have been in contact with someone that's got the disease. And so you can see that from these questions, I've already determined that probably this employee is going to need to submit a COVID request, a PTO request. So we'll pre-populate that to, yes, we'd like you to submit a PTO request. And then I've also conditionally kind of determined the outcome. So because we see there's some possibilities that there are symptoms and there's been contact, we're going to ask this employee to take a day of PTO because of this. So we will file that PTO request data for them. So I'm going to go look at the employee record. This happened to be Dana McAmaney's employee record. So I'm not going to file that yet. We're not going to push the button because we want to see the previous setting. So here's her employee record, and we see that we have related lists for that crisis assessment and for the PTO records. We don't have any records there yet. But after we say we've filled out this data and we submit, we can present a message saying, thank you for submitting, and probably could redirect to some other page at that point. But if we go back to, let's refresh her record and cross our fingers that everything worked. And go to the related lists. And there we see the two crisis assessments that just were returned. So we see that a crisis assessment was returned saying that someone most likely had some exposure to COVID-19 and that they were asking to take this day of PTO. So what the employee filled out was very simple. They didn't have to do, pick specific dates for the PTO request or pick specific categories of the assessment. They just had to fill out the questions that we were asking. But but really within the Skuid page, we were able to translate that to these specific records and submit those records to the system. So that's the end result of what we created. And so now we want to spend a little bit of time looking behind the scenes, looking at, okay, how is it that this is done? How do you build a page like this? How would you build functionality like this? So I'm going to go to what we call the Skuid Composer. Now, hopefully this is not, maybe there are some of you that have tons of experience in an environment like the Skuid Composer. I hope that's the case. But maybe not. Maybe there are some of you who are for the first time seeing Skuid. So let me just spend a couple of minutes talking through the basics of the Skuid Composer. So there are three basic sections to the Skuid Composer. This section that's over here, top left, is what we call the palette. And it's where all of the elements that a user can interact with or include in the page are available. So all of the UI components that are available, all of the models, which are our data access components. I'll get into those a little later. Action sequences, which are kind of our ability to define interactive functionality, and JavaScript, which is our ability to extend Skuid. So all of those elements are defined here in the palette. Then top right, you're going to see a properties pane. And with everything you click in Skuid, the properties pane is going to change. This is where you define what your particular aspect of the page is doing. So here, I have a series of properties, and often they're fairly extensive, lots of different properties that you can define for the component or model or field or action that you are configuring. So that the properties pane is where you do most of your configuration of the Skuid page. And then down below is what we call the canvas. And this is kind of a WYSIWYG representation of your page. So if you remember, you saw these things on the page. You saw the form. So all of these are down here in the canvas and are drag and droppable. So if you need to move things around, you just pick up and drag and drop. So between those three elements, we have palette items that we drag onto the page. We select that item, we configure it, we move things around on the page. That's the way Skuid is built. Now let's dig a little bit more into the data model that we're using for this page. And I want to show you a couple of things that are really, really elegant about Skuid. So as I said, we wanted to interact to create three records. We wanted to create this consent record, this wellness assessment record, and this PTO request record. And in some scenarios, we're only going to create two. If the employee is fine and is going to come to work, let's not create that PTO request record. Each of these objects in Salesforce are carried by, the identity for that object is different. So the wellness assessment and the PTO request look up to the employee object. The consent form looks up to the new individual secure object that is available in work.com. Again, I find it often very helpful to be looking at a data model, that Salesforce, their ERD diagrams are very helpful. The documentation about what specifically is in each object. So these are helpful. But even in Skuid, you can get some representation of what's going on. So for the consent form, we can look at the fields and we can identify that there is a consent giver ID that is a lookup probably to the individual. So then what we can do is we can add a condition to that, these records that we're creating, that pre-populate the data associated with that record. So when the user comes in, they don't have to say, okay, who's the consent giver, and fill out that piece of the form. We can pre-populate that data. So I've got a lot of the data for this consent form already pre-populated. When was that consent captured? Okay, we could dynamically say date and times to today or to right now, to midnight of the day before. Those kinds of features, really easy to pre-populate data that well. And I'm limiting this just to the individual. Well, how do I guarantee that that individual is the current user? Well, I'm also going to go and get the record for the individual. I'm going to get the record for the employee. And I'm going to use, again, conditions on our data access components to bind that to the currently active user. So this condition says only retrieve for me the individual record that is associated with whose owner is the current active user. So that way I know I'm only going to get one record, and it's going to be the record of the currently active user. Now, for my testing, I also created a condition here so I could pass a parameter in here so I could get multiple users. But the ultimate production version of this application would use the currently active user to drive identity into the individual model. And then we have, I showed it to you a little bit before, but we have this concept of chaining models together, chaining conditions together. So the employee model doesn't need to look, again, to the current active user. The employee model can look up to the individual model for its condition. So first we get the individual model. We know what the ID is in that individual model. Then we go and pass that ID into the where clause of the employee query, and we run the employee query, and again just retrieve one record, and that's the individual. So we get one record for individual, one record for employee, and then we can use that to pre-populate the records for consent and for wellness assessment and for PTO requests. So the idea of being able to grab data from multiple Salesforce objects, to be able to chain conditions together so that the data retrieved or pre-populated in those objects it ensures its relationship is correct, and the possibility of using the current user as a query parameter as part of the where clause. All those three things together make it for a very rich data environment for creating a form that's specific to the user and allows for multiple objects to be interacted with at the same time. Okay. That was a lot. I hope you guys are all kind of understanding what we're doing here. John, does that make sense? Any questions you have, or any ways you want me to clarify what I just laid out in terms of data access?
No, I think it's really good. I think one of the key things that we talk about is just building dependencies between models, and that's essentially what you're describing. You have one sort of key record that everything else really needs to function. Yep. And so that individual is the linchpin. And once you have that, everything else that ID can cascade down through the rest of the dependent models. And so it makes it so that everything can be in the context, the proper context. So no, I think that's great, and you explained that really, really well. So that's good.
Okay. So then another concept we have at the model level that I used in this application is the concept of a UI-only model. And this is a model where I'm just interacting on the page. I'm just using this to manipulate the UI or work with data. And so I built out the questions for this form in a UI-only model. So the specific questions that I asked the user were not necessarily the fields on the underlying objects that I'm submitting, but I wanted to do things like have better pick list values or combined values, or I wanted to make the labels a little more extensive, or I wanted to have one question that really drove a couple of different answers in the underlying data. There's reasons why you're going to want to have the experience be different than the underlying data. And a UI model lets you do that. So these are essentially, it'll just create an empty container in the UI that has these fields available to be interacted with. And with the UI only model, I can really define any kind of field type I want, if this is a Boolean or a text field, or in this case, I've defined pick lists and I've specified what the pick list values I want, what those labels are going to be. So this is how I made those really elegant button sets that only had the two options available. And so this really gives me some flexibility in my UI. So if I go back to the page, I can see that these questions, these are all, the questions really only exist in the UI here. What that forces me to do after a question is interacted with is I have to build in my Skuid page processes that migrate that data or interpret that data back into the underlying real Salesforce data records. And so I'll spend a minute here, again, stepping back up to a high-level introduction to talk about our Salesforce model builder. So I've been messing with it here. Maybe you've seen these three categories for each of these areas. You have your fields, which is essentially are the what statements in your query. You have conditions, which are the where clauses in your query. We spent a little bit of time talking about conditions, but we also have what we call actions. If I was a hardcore database environment, I'd call these stored procs. They're essentially, it's a way of taking events that occur in a model and creating interactivity associated with those events. And in this case, what I'm doing, so those three options are going to be available on any of your Skuid models, and really can do different things based on the type of data source that you're using, the type of model that you're using. In this case, this is a UI-only model, not connected to anything on the back end, but the actions that I'm using take the data. When data is changed in the UI-only model, I want to take the results of that data and push it to the real records on the back end. So here what I'm saying is when the consent question is updated, so when there's a change in the value of that consent field, I want to go and really do a fairly complicated series of events. I want to test what the answer was, and if the answer is no, then I want to update a couple of things. I want to say that the assessment, if the user does not consent to have their data taken, I want to say that the assessment was declined. So here I'm taking data, I'm taking a single question in a form, and I'm updating values in 2 objects. So the wellness assessment object says, I declined to take the wellness assessment. And then the consent object says, I saw that consent question. And I did, rather than saying I signed the consent, I've just seen the consent. So that's if the answer is no. On the other hand, so that's what the branch does. So we have this action called branch, which shoves actions down one side of the logic division. And then we can optionally let the whole sequence of actions continue or stop it right there. In this case, we want to stop it. But we also want to define what happens on the other side of the logic branch. And that is, so in this case, if the consent answer is yes, we want to update, again, these 2 records. We want to say, no, they signed the consent, and they also, and we also want to make the wellness assessment, we want to clear the value of the wellness assessment. This is how we handle the scenario where the user kind of goes back and forth. First they say no, then they say yes, then they say no. What do I want to do? What do I want to do? Well, when they say no, they were saying, I've only seen the consent and I've declined the wellness assessment. Well, when I say yes, okay, now they've signed the consent, but I don't know what I don't know the specific value that they're going to give ultimately for the wellness assessment. So I'm just going to clear that value out. So we handle the updates on both sides. So I've got actions here for each of the fields in my UI-only model to populate the values of the underlying items. So the final one here, do I need to submit a COVID request? So again, if the answer is yes, I'm going to actually create a new row in the in the PTO request model. When the page loads, there's nothing in that model. There's no rows created in that model. But only if the UI only model detects a change and the value is yes, well, the PTO request value is yes, only when that happens, I will create the PTO request model. So this kind of, this use of a UI only model to drive to use actions in the UI only model to drive the population of the underlying data gives you some really robust control of the UI and also robust control of the specific interactions, the specific answers and values that are collected in your data. You could do some really, really complicated things, but you can also make elegant, very simple things.
Hey, Rob. So I like those 2 words you just used between simple and elegant, or the complicated and the elegant piece. So I think one of the things that's really clear about what you're working through is there's some complicated logic that we can plug into some of these apps that we build, but the point is that the complication is on the build side. You've hidden it from the user. So instead of the user having to wrestle with the data model, having to wrestle with understanding all of the related pieces of the app, what you can present is something that to them looks like one single form. And that's something that makes their interaction with that simple, often delightful, but much less painful than it would have been otherwise.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, so we call Skuid a low-code platform. There is still room for very creative and complicated implementation using Skuid. In some ways, we think of Skuid as a perfect environment for people who would typically end up writing a bunch of code, who think that way, who think about these complex logic chains, who understand the dependencies and are kind of wired mentally to think about the edge cases and handle the edge cases elegantly. All those things are important sort of skills and values that make a good Skuid builder. However, with Skuid, I can build a robust application like this in a fraction of the time it would take me if I had to actually go to code, if I was trying to code this out in a Lightning Web Component. And also in Skuid, I'm coding all this in one place. I don't have to go to a lot of different builders, a lot of different code editors, a lot of different properties and configuration. That, as powerful as the Salesforce platform is, a lot of our customers come to us and they say, what we love about Skuid is that I had to learn and understand and build things that were complicated, but I could do it all in one place rather than in a lot of different places, a lot of different experiences and builder environments on the Salesforce side. Okay. Now that we've kind of got the data structured and the interactions associated with the data, I want to show you a couple things about the UI. So I dragged the form component into my application, into my canvas, and I'll just replicate that up here. We have this fairly long list of components that you can interact with, and it's searchable, so that's nice. When things are long, you can search for them. And we just grab form and come down and put it in our page. As simple as that. And then once we're in the page, let's go, yep, we're on that survey questions UI only model. Once we're in that page, we have the ability to add a bunch of fields. So that's all I did. I just said, oh, yep, there's the 4 fields that I did. Let's see, I'll put them in the order that I'm interested in and apply them. So this part of the building is like trivial. It's super, super easy. And then what's really cool about Skuid is that once you've like started just building something like this, you're going to have a lot of properties, a lot of options for configuration. So at the highest level, so what's the mode that I want this form to be in? Then a bunch of display options. Do I want labels to be top or left? Where do I want errors to show? All those kinds of things. So there's going to be a lot of interesting configuration really at every level of the form. So at the section level for individual rows, no configuration for rows, that's interesting. But then for the field itself, and this configuration will depend on the type that's being used. In this case, this is a pick list field. But we have some options. Do we want to show it like a traditional pick list control? Do we want to show radio buttons? We chose the button group display method. So these are standard out-of-the-box display methods. If you want to write additional display methods, we're building abilities for you to do custom display methods where you would write some JavaScript that would interact with this field that would get all of the values and get all the metadata associated with that field, but you could control very specifically the display and the interaction that this field had. So those are ways of taking Skuid and really pushing hard into true development tools. So that's the configuration. Then I'm going to delete this because I'm going to go back to the one that I built originally. You'll see I did things like at the section level, I didn't want to show the heading. So I hid the heading because I was comfortable with the answer, the things I had above. I want to show you how I did that progressive build, which was I think is a really good way of helping users quickly get through the questions that you're asking them. That's a feature we call conditional rendering. So one of the properties on most all of our components and areas within the application is an area called display logic. So here on the systems, on the symptoms field, I made a render condition rule. So essentially what that means is this condition or this kind of rule statement has to be true in order for the field to display. I could also make this an enable condition. At the field level, I could block the interactivity with the field unless a condition was true. So the user would see the whole form, but not be able to answer questions 2, 3, and 4 until they answered question 1. That would be another way you could add sort of clarity and simplicity, but an effective guiding through the application. We have other forms of what we call display logic that all use the same pattern. In this case, the rule is pretty simple. I'm simply saying if the consent question is not blank, then I'll show the field. So when the user starts the page, of course, the consent question is blank, and that's why the next field doesn't show. But the moment the user provides an answer to that consent question, then the next statement populates and displays. So I do this all the way down. So the contact question only displays if the symptoms question is not blank. The COVID response pick list question only displays if the contact question is not blank. So this is the way I kind of build that form sequentially. And then at the bottom of the page, I had these, the sort of the result or the action that's taken. And again, I use conditional rendering to choose between one of 3 possible outcomes. So I have the everything looks fine, we look forward to seeing you at work today option. And that is only rendered if, let's look at those rules. Okay, that is only rendered if the crisis assessment record says no symptoms are found and if there's no PTO request being asked for. So if those 2 statements are both true, then we'll show this whole section. And you can get really sophisticated with this logic. This logic will allow you to do an all combination, everything has to be true to show, or an any combination. If any of these are true, then you show, or a custom, like if 1 and 2 or 3, those kinds of things. So you can get some really sophisticated logic rules that drive your displays, drive your enablement of displays. We also let you do things like different styling. So maybe something is big and red if a field value is X, but is blank and small if a field value is Y. So that's what we call a display variant condition. So between those 2 rendering options, I have that's really the way I've added sophistication to this form, both control of how the user fills it out and also control of what the options are associated with finishing that form. And then each of these submit buttons really just does a different thing. It's obviously taking the values that have been created in the forms from the UI only model, but then the submit button saves that record and also populates that message that you saw. In this case, when everything is good, we're not saving a PTO request model or record. So we're only saving the wellness assessment and the consent. But if you do need to save if you do need to take a day off, then we're going to save all 3 models, create 3 records in the back end for that. So John, that's the basic construction of the page. I want to talk real quickly about the branding. You saw that this looks really nothing like standard Salesforce layouts. Obviously, with Salesforce, you can write a bunch of code and to tie to custom CSS and do branding. But with Skuid, we have what we call the Design System Studio. And I'm not going to go into that today to show you how that Design System Studio works. Actually, I think our very next App-etizer webinar is going to be one of our design gurus named Wen, who does amazing stuff with the Design System Studio. And I think she's going to talk about styling some of these forms. I actually took work she has already done, and I want to show you that it's on that sample pages repo that I showed you. She's got a design system that you can pick up and put in your own org, and follows the the Google material design standards. So I actually just copied that design system for this work, copied a sample page that she has. She has a demo page that you can download and install. And that made my work so easy because she had already had the page structures built, already had sort of the ways the specific elements should have structure and padding, and I was able to very quickly use that. So it's another quick way to get started. We have 4 or 5 of these design systems that you can pick up and use in your own org today. So that's branding. Now just a real quick, you see that I've shown you this page. It's kind of just hanging out here in isolation. Deployment, what would that look like? Again, we're not going to do this today, but just some quick ideas. You could deploy this in a bunch of different ways. We could deploy it as a part of a Lightning page in your core Salesforce org. And if someone logged in, they could see this page. It would be it could be a tab in their app. Could be linked in other ways in that org. It could be connected as a Lightning tab that's then bound to the navigation of the Salesforce mobile app and deployed that way. So your users log into the mobile app and they'll see it as one of the options in the menu. It could be deployed as part of a community, and either as a publicly accessible page in the community, in which case you wouldn't get the identity that we talked about, but if there was a user login, you could still get the user information. You can even deploy it as a public site. Again, but you'd have to handle the identity questions differently. But there's a lot of different ways you can deploy a Skuid page. Really, anywhere you put a Lightning app page, you can put a Skuid page. It works really seamlessly. So that's the application we built. I think we have some more exploration in the work.com environment. We want to look at the back end and look at the ways Skuid could make this, the control center better. How could Skuid give better information to employers about the data that's being populated? We want to look at how the integration to other data sources could be possible using MuleSoft and Skuid. There's a really great story there. We'd love for you guys to stay tuned to that. And then finally, I just want to let you know that everything that I've done today is going to be available for you to download and interact with. So in that sample pages repo, it's not there right now. It'll be there today. But when we've published this in the YouTube videos and the descriptions, when we send you follow-up emails, we'll send you links to this GitHub repo with instructions on how to install both the salesforcework.com kind of preview editions in a Scratch org, and then the custom object that we were interacting with, and the Skuid pages and design systems. Install all that in the Scratch org, and you can play along with play along with this, see what I was doing, and make it your own.
Well, Rob, this is awesome, man. Such a good example of how we can take how Skuid. You can take something that is really kind of complicated and involved behind the scenes and make it so simple for a user to interact with. I think that's one of the best use cases for Skuid is really trying to take something that's convoluted and present it in a really elegant way. So great job, and thanks for sharing that with us. Yeah, so we got a little bit of time for Q&A. I haven't seen any questions come in yet, which is totally fine. But if we will take another minute or two and see if anybody has any questions for Rob or just about Skuid in general. And then if not, we will go ahead and close it. So we'll just give you guys a second.
Pop up in the chat and see this. Yeah.
But if not, no sweat. We appreciate all y'all's time and jumping on with us today. Rob, appreciate your time going through this. I know this was a fun exploration for you to build. Appreciate you sharing it with everybody.
Yeah, it's been good. It's been good.
Cool. Well, it doesn't look like we have any more questions coming in, which is totally fine. We invite you guys to stick around for the next, or come back and visit us again for the next Skuid App-etizers that Rob previewed a little bit. So Wen York is one of our designers, and she's going to be sharing some more information for us. So we'll get that invite out and get that information up on our website. But in the meantime, we appreciate everybody coming out, and we will say goodbye for now. Thanks for coming, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.